That's perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone to this virtual event on companion planting. So this event tonight is being co-sponsored by the Plymouth Community Garden, as well as by Little Gardens Everywhere, which is a nonprofit program that has been created by the Plymouth Area Renewable Energy Initiative Group. And their mission is to unify neighbors and strengthen the local food supply by offering educational workshops, resources, and community connection around gardening and food. And my name is Liz Kelly, and I'm the secretary of the Plymouth Area Community Garden Group, which is located near the Common Man Inn in Plymouth. Some of you in the area might have driven by it. Some of you might be gardeners at the community garden. I know some people on the call are. And so before we launch into our talk tonight, I'd like to just introduce our speaker, Willa, very briefly. Willa is from broadly the Seacoast area. Is Chester in the Seacoast area? Ish, yeah. Okay, so I guess the southeast portion of the state. And she is a master gardener and an environmental educator. And she's also the founder of the Magpie's Apprentice, where she offers garden and nature education workshops and also offers garden design and installation services. And we're really excited that she's here with us tonight to talk about the topic of companion planting. And so please feel free to add any of your questions in the chat box or use the raise hand function or just raise your hand if you have your video on. Willa, I'll let you decide how you want to best moderate questions, but I can just be of help for you to help kind of field those and catalog them in the chat box as needed. And I'll just ask everyone to, while you're not talking, keep yourself on mute just so that we reduce background noise and all that. And with that, I think that's all from me. I will turn it over to Willa.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Liz. Thank you all so much for being here and taking time out of what is every gardener's busiest time of the year. I know that a lot of us are getting super antsy about getting out in the soil. Some of us have even been out in the soil. I know Liz and I were talking earlier, we've already been out and about and getting things prepped because it seems like our frost dates are changing. Anyone else notice that our climate here in the Northeast has been a little bit different than it has been in years past? Yeah, me too. And it's getting to the point now where I think we're going to be bumping back a week. So there's all sorts of really crappy things that are coming along with climate change, but having a slightly longer grow season here in the Northeast might not be the worst of the worst. So my name is Wilhelmina Soroka. I'm coming in from Chester, New Hampshire, as Liz had mentioned earlier, which is sort of kind of seacoast. We're about 30 minutes south of Manchester. It's more of an agricultural town, which is super cool and kind of how I got really started in gardening myself. I love it. It is good for my brain, it is good for my body, and it is good for your brain and your bodies too. Everyone has the ability to garden, whether it's in an itty bitty teeny tiny pot and container on a windowsill or on acres of field. You guys are all capable of greatness. Any one of you has the potential of taking a little tiny seed and fostering something phenomenal. And so today's concept is all about how we can take those seeds and have not only one successful plant, but have numerous successful plants all in conjunction with one another, because we're talking about community collaboration, not only with our neighbors, but with our plants, how we can create neighborhoods of non-feuding plants in plots that are either itty bitty or gigantuan. The biggest takeaway I would love for you guys to have today is fill your beds. And I know that's going to sound a little funky right now, but I am absolutely referring to vegetable beds, not anything else. Don't be crazy. And I'm wanting lots and lots of space fillers, because the less soil we leave exposed to the air, the less weeds you guys are going to end up having, the less pest problems you're going to end up having, and the better companion plantings you're going to have, as long as you follow a couple guidelines. So the way this particular webinar, lecture, whatever is going to work is I've got some sweet PowerPoint slides that I'm going to start sharing momentarily. And the chat box is definitely the best place to drop your questions, unless it's something that's totally topic relevant, because I'm going to be throwing a ton of information at you guys, and I will do a break, I promise. There's going to be a break halfway in between so that we can digest some of the information I'm throwing at you, and then we're going to shift gears. Sorry? Someone excited, I hope. And then we're going to switch gears and start talking about the specific vegetables and common garden varieties that we can grow here in our Zone 5, Zone 5B, Zone 4B, a little bit further north, and ways that we can put this with this and have great, bountiful crops and harvests, and what things not to put together. So we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty in the second part, and then there will be time for a small activity for those of you who are interested. My favorite part of any garden lecture and any lecture in general is the Q&A session. So please fill out that chat box as you go. Like I said, if you've got something that's really topic relevant, if I mention something and you have something you need to share or you've got experience, feel free to do a little wave or pop up the hand thingy-majig where you can, virtually raise your hand, and we'll take care of it right then so you don't lose it. But otherwise, there's gonna be lots of info. I'm sure you're gonna have amazing questions. I'm sure you're gonna have stories to share, and I'll give you opportunities for that. I just wanna make sure that in our short period of time, I can give you the best that I can without talking 9,000 miles a minute. I'm gonna try to keep it at about 8,000 miles a minute, but if I am getting too fast, that's one of these. Please give me one of these because I get really jazzed about gardening and sometimes I just talk too fast. So give me a big hail. Maybe Liz, if you see anyone in the chat being like, whoa, speedster, slow down, just give me something and I'll cap it a little bit. All right, my friends. So let's begin by jumping into this. I'm going to attempt sharing so that I can actually see my notes too. So Liz, you tell me if we're seeing that full screen. Yeah, oh, super, okay, awesome. All right, guys, so companion planting 101. Now, first things first, I'm gonna totally skip like all of this fun stuff about me because it's really not that fun. I play with gardens. Liz already gave an introduction. I own and operate my own small business that's completely centered around ecology and the environment and helping and preserving wildlife. And in between doing that, I garden and it works out fairly well. So these are some of the organizations that I'm personally involved in and would highly encourage any of you interested in gardening or wildlife or a combination of both of those, because these go really, really well together. New Hampshire Herbal Network, New Hampshire Audubon, New Hampshire Extension, and then Dillon Old Farm Nursery is where I currently work in Chester, and it's super cool and cute. So if you want to come and check us out, please visit. But this is the topic, right? This is what we are here about. And companion planting is a very broad term. A lot of people think about companion planting as planting one species of vegetable or flower to benefit another. And while yes, that fits under the definition of companion planting, there's a bazillion more things, more important from my perspective, that we need to discuss before we start talking about those individual plants and their relationships with others. And the way that I have always approached my gardening and my landscaping is following nature's lead. And I really want to impress that tonight because nature's been doing it for a lot longer than us. And so I want you guys to just for half a second, take a look at this little image, this photograph that I grabbed a couple weeks back while out on the trails. What are we seeing in this particular photograph? I want you to think broad. There's no wrong answers to this. Anyone who is comfortable speaking up, feel free to unmute yourself and just chime in. What are you seeing in this photograph? Compare it to what you see in our own gardens. Compare and contrast. Entertain me for just a moment in time. What are you seeing?
I see a variety of plants that are actually in different layers.
Excellent observation. A variety of different species and multi-layered effect. Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. Does anyone see anything else that they'd like to add? Do we see a lot of bare exposed soil, my friends? No.
Yes.
You do? You see bare exposed soil? I
No.
do not. I'm seeing soil that's completely covered by living organisms. Not only those little itty bitty ones that we can't even see with our naked eyes, but there's mosses growing on top of that. There's leaf litter. There's undoubtedly mycelium growing all underneath there. And there's a variety of different plants. If there is a spot that is vacant of plants, Mother Nature will quickly fill it up. Unlike most of the gardens that we have in our homes where our plants are divided and separated, sometimes in zigzags, mostly in rows, nature fills in the gaps. And that's something that I want to impress today because it's something that's going to continuously come up in companion planting. Where there is a will, there is a way in nature. And where there is a blank spot in your garden, you will get a weed unless you plant something that you're hoping for as an alternative. So within nature, we're also experiencing varied bloom times. Who wants to share what is in bloom right now, whether it's a cultivar, an ornamental, or something out in the wild? What are you guys seeing as you're driving? What are you seeing as you're out walking about in your regions? What's in bloom right now? Don't be shy. I can't see you anyways, so none of you need to be afraid. I can only see my PowerPoint and Liz.
I see fringed polygula out in the natural world. It's so
Very
beautiful.
cool. Very cool. That's a very specific one. Thank you. As you guys are driving around, I know you're just a little bit further north, but not significantly. Are your rhodies still in bloom up north? Your rhododendrons? Your azaleas? That's what I thought. How about lilacs?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Lilacs, yes. Rhododendrons haven't. Some of the azalea type ones, but the big rhodies haven't bloomed yet.
Oh, right on. So you guys are definitely a zone behind us because our rhodies are done down here. We are in azalea and lilac season, and our dogwoods are blooming, and our cherry blossoms have already passed. So varied bloom times are super important in nature, not just because that's how they're designed to work. It's not for our aesthetics. As gorgeous as our gardens look when we're getting constant blooms throughout the season, nature's doing this for a completely different purpose. It's working with the soil, and it's working with wildlife. We're dealing with different creatures that are coming back from their southern expeditures down in Mexico, down in Costa Rica. We're talking about birds. We're talking about different migratory species. Those different bloom times account for working with nature rather than against us. And that's something too that we want to start applying when we're thinking about companion planting. So without getting into too much more detail here, we're talking about, in nature, various blooming times, successional growth, because as we can see in this photograph on the left, these plants are growing at different heights with different depths at different times of the year. They're growing throughout the season. Everything doesn't bloom all at once. Imagine how boring our world would be if every single flowering plant was boom, all at once. The apples, the cherries, the peaches, the dogwoods, the lilacs, the lavenders, the rosemaries, the thymes, everything all at the same time, and then boom, we'd be done. That wouldn't work in nature, and it doesn't work in your garden either. So successional stuff is really important, making sure we're following cycles that work and understanding that if you're planting things a little bit too early, they might not get the pollinator beneficials or the beneficial pollinators or the benefits of actual pollinators in order to produce those fruits. Now, nature also provides all different types of shade protection with canopies. It provides vines and pillars and supports through trees and limbs and branches. Nature's got all sorts of really cool way of resisting pests, whether through companionship or through creating really oozy, gooey, crazy things that just resist pests from the beginning. And weed suppression is what we're seeing in this photo right there. Plants will grow anywhere there is bare soil. And so if we are planting things we want, we will unintentionally or intentionally suppress the weeds that would understandably come in. Symbiosis is another really unique thing going on in nature and stuff that we can't always see with our bare eyes, but it's happening below the soil, and the soil is your most important element of the garden. I would say soil is even more important than sun because we can offer artificial sun. We need to have good soil, and we're capable of making good soil. So let's keep moving on by briefly touching on succession planting with companion plants. And the concept is, why plant just once when you can plant throughout the season? Are there any of you guys out there that really enjoy growing radishes or beets or lettuce? You can give me like a little hand wave or a thumbs up. I'm thinking there's at least a couple of us out there that enjoy the fruits of our labor from those yummy, delicious greens. There's nothing fresher than salad picked directly from the ground, snipped and cut and tossed in the sink or under the hose and nibbled. These types of plants have quick growth and excellent yields when we plant them throughout the season. So it's a little bit of a time-consuming scenario where you have to create some sort of calendar events. meaning you don't just plant once and then get what you're hoping for. You're planting throughout the season. And successional planting provides or creates higher yields of your foods because you're not only just planting that one and getting that one and done scenario. You're planting once, and then maybe 7 days later, you're planting seeds again, and then maybe 10 days you're doing it. You figure out a cycle that works for the plant as well as you. Timing is important. And then you'll be able to continuously harvest until maybe mid-summer, especially for those lettuce when it gets just too darn hot for lettuce in New Hampshire. It's also a really awesome way to create space efficiency. So peas are going to get really hot really fast, and they're no longer going to be able to produce. But when we remove our peas from our beds, we've now opened up, what is that thing that we're trying to avoid? Bare soil. And so succession planting is when you are replacing plants that are spent or not doing well. Sometimes our plants just aren't thriving, and replacing them with other items. That is a companion planting element, this successional, consistent regrowth in a new location, reusing the soil, adding to the soil, and providing supplemental shades for some of our plants that otherwise wouldn't be able to survive in that type of heat. The successional planting works really well for some of our quick growing crops like those radishes and the lettuces. It's not going to work really great for things like squash that take an entire season to grow, or for tomatoes, but you're able to do all sorts of fantastic things in small spaces if you remember to continuously plant. Over and over and over again. Blank template soil equals weeds. Fill it in with the stuff you want to eat, and you're going to have a more bountiful season, less bugs, and way less weeds. My thing is being really weird over here. Hang on one second. What are you doing? Okay. When thinking about companion planting, not only are we talking about succession and figuring out when it is going to be the best time to start adding additional plants into our gardens, we also need to realize what kinds of plants, right? That's starting to get into the slightly more nitty-gritty. When we're thinking about what types of plants grow well when grown together, we have to think about not only what they're going to be doing aerially in terms of what type of space or how much space they're going to take in the air outside of the soil, but we need to think about what's going on under the soil as well, as depicted in this very comical, like children's artist drawing of these vegetables, where we're seeing the potatoes and the corn and the radish and your onions and beets and garlic, and then above with your tomatoes. There's all sort, and the one with the tomatoes, guys, how many of you have pulled up a tomato with a root that shallow? Yeah, right. Tomato roots go for like 7 miles. I swear some of them reach the core of the earth. Pulling them out at the end of the season is always a feat of muscle. But we really do need to think about what's going on underneath there. Because if you want to plant all of your root vegetables together, you're probably not going to have a lot of space to put a lot of those root vegetables, because while they don't create a lot up top in terms of their greens, they're doing a lot of work down below, and they're typically feeding on very similar nutrients. So thinking about what grows very similarly sometimes allows us to take them and spread them out rather than pulling them all together. Spreading them out allows room for growth down below and nutrients to be pulled from different levels of the soil. How many of you guys are cool with leaving dandelions in your vegetable garden beds? I'm seeing a couple hands go up immediately. Would anyone that threw up the hand be interested in explaining why it is they're comfortable leaving dandelions in the garden? There's probably a reason, and it's not just because they're beautiful and edible too. Anybody want to chime in? How many of you guys have pulled up a dandelion in the past? You know what you're getting, right? Yeah. Go ahead. I think it's Emily, right?
Yeah, so I leave them elsewhere in my yard, but not in my vegetable garden.
And why do you leave them anywhere in your yard at all versus yanking them up?
Because they're great for pollinators.
They are great for pollinators. They're also really awesome for our soil. Does anyone use them for their soil? Does anyone know what they're doing for your soil? Liz is like, there we go. Liz, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Michelle has their hand up.
Yes, please, Michelle.
Oh, I was saying that it has a deep taproot.
It does have a deep taproot.
So it helps aerate the soil.
Yes, bingo. It helps aerate the soil by breaking up the bedrock underneath. And I'm not talking about actual bedrock, but compressed soil that gets really hard and is like working through cement. How many of you guys have seen dandelions growing out of sidewalks, growing out of dirt walls, growing in places where you would never imagine a plant being able to survive, never mind thrive? Dandelions are the warriors of breaking up crap soil. And since we live in New Hampshire, newsflash, we all live on crap soil. That's why we have to amend it here in this area. Our bedrock isn't ideal. We are called the Granite State for a reason. Dandelions not only punch through hard, compacted soil, but they bring nutrients up like a straw and bring it to a much more available location for plants that have more fibrous roots and are only getting their nutrients from the upper 3 to 8 inches of the soil. The dandelion is a friend to everyone. It's great for pollinators. It's delicious in salads. It has all sorts of wonderful liver cleansing and detoxification medicinal elements to it. The thing is, with those seeds, it makes a little bit of a mess. And if you don't want to be constantly harvesting dandelions, let them grow, let them do that job for you rather than tilling and aerating. Let the dandelions do the work for you. But when you see them going to flower, cut off the bud, and now you're not dealing with the issue of them populating your garden to the point of no return. Recognizing the depths and heights of your plants allows you to better utilize your space. So if you're doing the root vegetables, you're cognizant of what's going on below the soil level. If you're growing vines, you're aware of how to encourage vertical growth rather than horizontal, because vertical growth gives you more space and it's a much better system for your plants because you can either grow more plants, which is always exciting, right? Like in that bottom left-hand corner where we've got some sort of cucurbit growing up that lovely trellis, that makes a beautiful shade garden for lettuce and other cool crops like cabbage or carrots to grow through the season rather than having to give up hope midsummer knowing it's just going to be too hot and too sunny. They create their own shade by providing, if we provide them with trellis. Additionally, we're not going to be dealing with as much bacteria or fungus growth because you're letting the plants aerate rather than having them sit and wilt on the wet soil, and also make a really great place for squash bugs to hide. So thinking about depth and height and going vertical rather than horizontal allows for really great companionships between both your plants and the positive critters that are living in your garden. Companion planting starts with this image for most people when we think of companion planting, and it's doing a lot of really great things. This is that three sisters concept, and this is when we start kind of shifting from what we can do to just generally prepare our garden to be an awesome companion planting garden and start thinking about the species that really work well together. And not just because
Hey, Willa.
Yeah, sure.
Really quick, not to interrupt. Michelle has her hand up. I just wanted
Go
to
for it,
note that
Michelle.
real quick.
Thanks, Liz. I can't see her. I literally only have like 6 of you. So anytime, Liz, don't feel like you're interrupting at all.
No, I don't have my hand up. Sorry, that's from last time. I don't know how to make it go away. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No
I can
worries.
do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm sure a bunch of you guys are familiar with the three sisters concept, one of our indigenous people's concepts of utilizing the land to its best ability without pillaging it, and improving the soil by providing cover. And that's what those gourds and those squashes are doing, is providing shade cover for the soil so that the corn that is providing a trellis for the beans to grow on isn't overheated by the hot midsummer sun and doesn't require as much watering, because the squash is effectively a natural mulch. It's a living mulch. Instead of needing to use chopped straw or bark mulch or black tarp or any other thing that we go out, create, and bring in, the indigenous people knew that the sun was necessary for gardening, but could sometimes be detrimental in the heat of the full days of summer, which is when our corn and our gourds and all of our other delicious beans are really prospering. And if they fried out, there goes an entire crop and potential seeds and meals for the future. So this combination of having this really amazing symbiotic relationship between these plants, because not only is the corn is providing that amazing trellis, right, for our pole beans to grow up, but the beans are fixing nitrogen from the sky and putting it into the soil so that nutrient hungry squash and corns, corns, plural, corn, are growing in a much more hospitable habitat with excellent nutrients, with a nice, cool, shaded growth, and with weed suppressants and insect suppressants. This concept is very replicable in your own gardens. It does take up space, but can be done on smaller scales and with a variety of different plants. This, for most of us, is what we think of when we think of companion planting, and it works. It has worked historically for eons. Is there scientific data backing this? Nope, there's not. But where there's a will, there's a way. And when there's a tradition, there's usually some credence behind it. And this is one of the ones that I have so much success with every single year, even when I have squash bugs, which seem to be consistently here in the Northeast. This particular element, this three sisters scenario, seems to work the best at keeping them at bay. And even when we have them, they don't seem to get as the plants don't seem to get as overwhelmed as they do when they're planted apart from these particular species. Not only is it really effective for the plants and the growth, but it's really beautiful. And you don't have to just do beans. You can always do other trailing, flowering creatures. And if you don't want to do corn, you're looking for more of an ornamental concept, you can companion plant with sunflowers and morning glories or any other species that makes you happy. The big thing here is you have to do a teeny bit of research on your seed packets, because every once in a while there are some plants that don't play well with others. When it comes to the flower world, most of them get along just fine. There's just a couple of tree species that effectively give out a chemical that says, back off, Buster, don't grow where I'm growing, I'm not gonna make it hospitable for you. But for the most part, you can get away with a lot in the gardening world. Check out nature, it's happening all the time right outside our doors. Here is a fun little challenge for you guys that I like to call Find the Bok Choy. And this is expressing one of the reasons we companion plant. Not only is it because it's effective for the soil, it's effective for the other plants, providing trellises, providing shade, providing windbreaks. It also does this really cool thing where it confuses pests. So while you guys are looking at this delightful row of various types of greenery, different types of lettuces, are you guys able to find the bok choy? You guys can give me like a head nod or a thumbs up, right? Yep, I'm seeing it. Okay, super. So I want you guys to think like a cabbage looper moth, okay? You guys were all able to see the bok choy. If you were a cabbage looper moth or a vine borer or any type of insect, you would have much better eyesight than you do right now, meaning you would have zeroed in on that a lot faster than you did, even if you blinked and you saw it super quick. The concept is, as an insect, you've got way better eyesight than any human ever will. You've got compound eyes, right? You've got a bazillion different lenses helping you see what's going on in your natural world. And if you are a hungry cabbage looper looking for your preferred crop of choice, you're going to see it quick, especially when it's planted in these delightful colored rows. Now, find the bok choy here. A little bit trickier, isn't it? You mere mortals with your human eyeballs are going to have a heck of a time finding the bok choy. That is what we're hoping to do with our compound-eyed predators, the ones that are out there hunting for our soft cabbages and our delicious baby greens. The bok choy, for those of you still looking, is in the bottom right-hand corner, tucked below the red cabbage. You guys see it? Surprise, there it is. This idea of edible landscaping, of mixing and matching your ornamentals, of completely getting rid of that concept of nice, neat rows of organized colors, this works best for confusing the bugs. Your pollinators are always going to find the flowers. They've got the ultraviolet eyes looking for that stuff. They can see it. There's pollinator syndromes. There's so many different miraculous ways that our insects that we're happy to see in our garden are capable of coming to our garden. But by confusing the pests, we can put them at bay. The idea here is if we mix and match our gardens and move and shift our crops, not just by crop rotation, which we'll touch on momentarily, but by actually interplanting different species that get along with one another, which is coming, I promise, that's the topic of tonight's show. This idea right here is to confuse the pests. So when they're doing a flyby and looking for that specific shape, they're not seeing it anymore, just like you didn't see it as quickly as you did in this last slide. This image for an insect is a hallelujah. This is, oh, heck yeah, the buffet is here, and they're going to invite all of their friends. This is one of those scenarios where we end up utilizing a ton of pesticides or doing a ton of money because we have to invest in covers, row covers, mesh covers, creating things that are impermeable to other bugs to get in, which isn't great for the bugs that we want to have in. It'll work for lettuce because we're not wanting our lettuce to flower, but for a garden like this, you wouldn't have the time or space to cover it, and you wouldn't need to because the bugs aren't finding what you are planting as easily as they would if they could zero in on it when it's in those straight lined rows with basic like fluorescent lights pointing, come stop here. So intercropping and edible landscaping is another super cool way that companion planting can mix into your garden concepts and really work in a beneficial way for you guys. Additionally, this looks a lot more like a naturescape than this ever will. This is basically a front lawn, right? It's a monoculture. Yes, there's different colors, and that's absolutely beautiful. I mean, don't get me wrong, that my OCD brain says that and says, wow, that's what I want. But it doesn't look like what nature has created, right? That does not exist in nature. But something like this with multi-layers and different colors and height variations, this is what nature's doing. And nature, remember, is our guide for both companion planting as well as organic gardening. So when we're doing different types of edible landscaping, we don't have to have these big, huge sections of land cleared for this. People are doing edible landscaping in their front yards, their backyards, their patios, acres and acres of it, and teeny tiny balconies of it. Whatever works for you guys is a benefit to both you. Oh, hang on. Okay, we're good. Will be a benefit for you and a benefit to the ecosystem that you're living in. And I'd like to think that most of us gardeners are eco-conscious or eco-aware, meaning you have that knowledge that what you're doing outside is directly interacting with your environment. Because unless you're growing entirely in a little tiny hoop house where you have a controlled climate and the doors are closed and you hand pollinate everything, which I'm thinking none of us are doing. I hope none of you are doing. It sounds like a very lonely existence for gardening. We're out there in the fresh air and we are creating micro ecosystems within our grander ecosystems. And when we do that, we hope to invite the critters that we're really looking forward to having, those that benefit our gardens rather than destroy them like groundhogs and chipmunks. But for this particular experience, when we're doing this edible landscaping, the idea is that we are inviting in the good guys and keeping out the bad guys, because we're confusing the bad guys, but creating really welcome environments for the good guys, as is the case of this particular image. I'm pointing, there's a little white arrow that's pointing to a blue spruce, and that image in the upper right-hand corner is the little itty bitty chipping sparrow babies that were fledging while we were growing all of our crops. And because these guys are primarily seed eaters, but start off with insects, Mom was out and about snatching insects off of the garden and delivering them to her growing babies. This other photo up here, we've got an arrow pointing to the top of a little security light, was the home to a family of phoebes, insectivorous flycatchers, who very happily took up residence at the greenhouse because where there are plants, there are bugs. And if we invite birds and other positive creatures of the wild, rather than excluding them through monocultures with specific single straight lines, manicured stuff, we end up missing out on these awesome natural pesticides, the bugs that come in and eat the insects that we don't want eating our greens. Another awesome way to invite these guys in is offering a little bird bath or tossing in a bird house around your perimeter, because now you're not only companion planting with plants, you're companion planting with nature and bringing in wildlife as a pro rather than a con. Another option for companion planting, and this is my last little slide before we breathe and we talk about all of the stuff that I just tossed at you guys, is the concept of using a sacrifice plant or a trap crop. Now, I'm assuming a bunch of you guys have heard of these phrases before. Trap crops and sacrifice plants, it's totally interchangeable. I think sacrifice plants is just funny to talk about. Trap plants, trap crops, same concept. And it's just planting a specific variety of a specific plant. The ones that I use frequently, nasturtiums, kale, tomatillos, and hops, those ones work the best for me. Those plants I plant, not for myself, I plant for the bugs, and I plant for the bad bugs. My goal is that by planting nasturtiums, I will get aphids, but rather than my aphids being in my garden and on my pepper plants, they're going to be on the nasturtiums, which I conveniently locate far enough away from the garden that they don't travel over to the peppers or the arugula and decimate them. And then the nasturtiums either get doused in neem oil or they get sprayed down with water, and then the lovely little aphids fall into a vinegar bath, or they just get bagged and tossed. Kale, great for catching different types of caterpillar and larva stage, like sawfly type things. Tomatillos attract everything. Every single pest I've ever personally had on any of my gardens, I have found on the tomatillos, which is kind of a shame because they're delicious too, but I always plant one of them far away from my garden. And by far away, I mean not directly in my garden, but not far enough away that it's too far away that the bugs aren't going to find it. We'll elaborate more on that later. The idea is still that as much as I would love to be eating those tomatillos, it's easier for me to just give one to the bugs, because the hope is that the bugs will stay on that one and leave the rest of them alone. Same with the hops. I'm not a beer brewer, and when I grow hops, it is strictly for the bugs because they decimate the hops, but they stay out of the garden, which is wonderful. So companion planting is a lot more than just planting one single plant to benefit one other plant. It's this whole concept of creating really solid life experiences in your garden by following nature's lead, creating gardens and planting species that have various bloom times throughout the year, planting them in succession so that when one row of radishes is getting plucked and popped into the garden salad, another row of seeds is getting planted in its stead, rather than waiting for crabgrass and quackgrass to grow in instead. It's recognizing and acknowledging different root depths as well as aerial space. It's very important, of course, to know if you have enough space up top, but you need to remember how much space is going down below, and thinking about that depth in terms of the nutrients. Who's using what level of soil to suck nutrients, and allowing those dandelions from time to time to naturalize, because they're breaking up your soil, aerating it, and sucking up nutrients and bringing them up to the higher levels of soil where more of our garden plants are growing anyways. We're going to be providing shade protection as well as wind blocks, depending on how we orient our taller plants and position our smaller, less sturdy plants. We're going to be using our plants as pillars, so creating plants that are edible or beautiful or a combination of both, and using them not only for food and beauty, but for tools within the garden. And we're going to be planting a lot of herbs, because herbs are known for having natural pest resistance and growing really well when planted amongst our vegetables. We're also going to be looking to cover the soil with things that we're hoping to consume or enjoy, whether through beauty or through nutrition, and allow the soil to constantly maintain its moisture, because we are suppressing weeds and retaining moisture, which in our new drought-ridden New Hampshire is super important as well. Everything we are trying to do is with the object and intention of symbiosis in your own micro ecosystem within your own backyard, front yard, community garden, or elsewhere. And with that, we're going to pause. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can digest some of this stuff and take a few minutes to experience, or not, no, we're not experiencing anything. We're virtual. I'm not showing you an actual garden. I'm sorry. We're going to take this time for you guys to share your experiences with any of the things we've talked about so far, as well as ask any questions for clarification. And it looks like we've got a bazillion things in chat. So let's start there first and foremost. Okay. Oh, you guys are so good. Let's see. Oh, Liz was talking about dandelions and eating their greens and using their roots for medicinal tonics. Their roots are so good. Dandelions attract pollinators. They are a taproot. They grow between your toes, Terry Sackett, and they are beautiful. Japanese beetles, is there a trap for them? There is. It's a good one, but you're probably not going to love the concept. It's a rose plant. Roses are like crack to Japanese beetles, and they seem to really, really, really love the yellow ones the most. Of course, the yellow ones, to me too, are the most beautiful, and they seem to have the most lovely fragrance compared to the other varieties, but the Japanese beetles come out the second they bloom and decimate them. And so for me, I always have one sad sacrificial yellow rose on the property. And I go out in the early morning with my little jug of, it's an old laundry detergent jug, and it's got a little bit of soapy water in it. And I go out when it's still cool in the morning, and I flick those little suckers right into it where they can drown in the soapy suds. They go to the flower, I get them off of the flower. The flower looks like crap. I'm not gonna lie. I don't get all of them off in time, but they stay away from my beans and my peas, where not, it's my beans actually specifically. Does anyone else have any tricks for Japanese beetles? Because those little yellow traps, unless you're putting them on your neighbor's yard, are not doing your garden any favor. I can assure you of that. Does anyone have any techniques or tricks that have worked for them for Japanese beetles? Anybody? They're tricky. Sacrifice roses. I know. It sounds terrible, right? It sounds like a Shakespearean drama, but that's what has always worked for me. It was unintentional. I tried a bunch of other plants, but for me, every single year where I lived on my last property, I had a slope and my garden was down here so I could catch the rainwater. And I had red roses from the last owner, as well as one yellow rose, and then some lilacs and shrub. That's about it. And lots of Japanese knotweed. And all the Japanese beetles were either on my beans over here or on the yellow rose, but they started on the yellow rose. And the first year I was there, I let them do their thing on the yellow rose. I let them eat it. And then they came to the beans. The second year, I knocked them off from the yellow roses and I didn't have them on my beans. And the 3 years after that, I never had Japanese beetles in my garden again because I let them attack the yellow rose and then I would scoop them off in the mornings. They're gross. I get squeamish with Japanese beetles. They're crunchy and they have weird connecty things on their legs like barbs that hold on to you and freak you out. But if you can get over that, do it in the morning when they're slow and sluggish and it's cool, and dispose of them as you need to. Chickens, anyone out here with chickens? They love Japanese beetles. So instead of doing soapy water, if you just catch them, you have to have like a narrow tube, almost like a beer bottle setup so that it can't come back up, but shake them to disorient them and then sprinkle it in your chicken coop and your girls will love you forever. Tomato hornworms are a great one. My chickens will not eat those. I don't blame them. They are like aliens and they're usually as big as the chickens. Tomato hornworms are a pain in the butt, but they go for the same thing every single year. So you know what you're looking for immediately. It's just a matter of catching them quickly. Tomato hornworms are going for your hot peppers. They're going for your tomatoes. They're going for your tomatillos. They're going for those nightshade families, and they do it quick, right? It's overnight. They go from being the size of your pinky nail to the size of your arm overnight. So catching them quickly. I don't have any trap crops for them besides my tomatillos, but they strip it so quickly that I still go out there to dispatch them. They go elsewhere. Trap crops work really well, but you have to remember, just because like it would be a beautiful world if we could just be like, oh yeah, I don't have any bugs, my nasturtiums take care of it. Guys, once they've eaten your trap crop, they're coming over to your garden. So you've got to be able to monitor that trap crop as well. It's just the concept of beautiful garden, trap crop, get to it when you can and dispose of those creatures, knowing that you're hopefully keeping these guys safer, but you can't ignore the trap crop area either. You got to be diligent, right? We have to be vigilant and diligent to our stuff. How about mycelium in the garden? Terry, can you clarify that? How about mycelium in the garden? Is that by bringing in leaf litter and encouraging growth in your garden? Or I don't think I'm understanding that one. If Terry's able to, you can write it in or whatnot. And while you're clarifying, is there anyone else that has any questions about some of the topics we've covered thus far in our adventure?
I just wanted to share that I find with it's actually the tobacco hornworm, not the tomato hornworm, misnamed, whatever. That if you just go out there in the morning, they're really easy. And so I haven't had a lot of success with this, but I know people who use black lights
at night. It's fun.
At night and really find them. I find it's so easy. You can pull them off and you can put them on the ground. And if you're wearing your gardening clogs and you just step on them, and it's very easy to get rid of them instead of trying to handle them too much. I think part of people get grossed out because they handle them. The other thing is if you have kids or grandkids,
they love them.
They think they're so interesting. That's a great way to handle them. They're actually really easy to handle, because they're fat and they're got all these different colors. And it can walk on your hands, and it's really a great way to take an animal that we've been taught to be that it's yucky and gross and turn them into something that's really fun. And then you can talk about how they're damaging to crops and then squish them, but maybe not in front of your grandchildren, your kids.
I think that's great. I'm one of those weird people. I keep them as pets from time to time because I think that metamorphosis thing is absolutely astounding. And they overwinter under the soil in cocoons, and they come back in the spring as the Sphinx Moths, which are pretty cool. It's those hummingbird moths, not the lacewing and not the clearwing that we refer to specifically as hummingbird moths, but they come back as a very similar species. And all of nature has a role. I just don't want them in my garden. And I don't think you guys do either, but I'm with you 100%. Offer them to a child, not to dissect and be gross with, but to experience that concept of either a scientific experiment in terms of not dissection. Again, I want to clarify, we are not encouraging children to kill and maim creatures, but to let them go through that cycle of metamorphosis and seeing the larval form. Just showing them how much they can grow in an evening is astounding in itself. I used to be a kindergarten teacher, so I was out there taking things from nature all the time and bringing them in. I don't have anything to improve them in the garden besides being diligent with them, because they will decimate it so quickly, but they're not bad creatures. Nothing out there is bad creatures. They're doing what they were supposed to be doing, and that's surviving. I have issues with a lot of the stuff that we have brought into our continents in hopes of amending different things, and now we are overrun with them and arguing about it, and it's like, we did this, so now we need to figure out how to live with them. For me, trap cropping works the best, and going out at night it's weird, it's wacky, but if you haven't gone out at night into your garden, I highly encourage you do it this year, because it is a very magical place in the evening, and we forget how many really unique pollinators we have, even in our frigid little New Hampshire colony at night. We have moths and ants and beetles of the most miraculous colors. Some of them suck because they're out there eating all your stuff, but others are doing exactly what they're hoping for and exactly what you're hoping for. They're pollinating your crops. The black light is really bizarre because you get to see a little bit of ultraviolet stuff that some of our bee species see that we don't see. So if you haven't gone out there with a headlamp or a lantern, it's really magical, and I highly encourage you to do it for two reasons. One, because there's not enough magic in this world, and we need to take advantage of it wherever we can find it. And two, because you might be able to experience the joy of catching those little predators that are mowing on your echinacea petals when you didn't realize there was a problem, and we're maybe blaming something else. So going out at night gives you a really cool opportunity to see your garden in a literally different light, and also find some predators that you don't want out there. Liz is, yeah, so this wine cap mycelium to different beds, mixing it with wood chips. I've never heard of them bringing in water from far off distances, but that's really cool and really interesting. I would love to know how that works. Are they taking it out of the soil or the air? Does anyone know the answer to that one? I always go out into the forest and scrape up, knowing where there's bittersweet. Don't do this if you have bittersweet or poison ivy growing. You can actually grow your own mycelium, right? There's amazing different experiments you can do outside involving rice and fermentation, but you can also, it's New Hampshire, we have leaves everywhere. So shipping them in the fall and then putting them on the edge of your garden and then flipping them mid-season before we get a lot of snow, and then allowing them to just hang out and then using them, tucking them into your garden beds. It's free mulch, it's excellent mulch, and it's a perfect host site for mycelium, which is that amazing mushroom network that is filled with awesome bacterias and little life networks that infuse your soil with the good stuff that your plants are hoping for. It's basically adding compost for free and allowing it to grow and regenerate over the years. The Hidden Life of Trees does a great job of explaining that. I believe it. Yes, it's all about communication and network exchange down below the soil, right? Soil is imperative. Soil is what's going to save our planet as long as we start growing it better and treating it better. Anybody else have any questions before we continue on with the slides? Maybe. I'll give you guys just a second in case we're coming off mute. All right. Am I overwhelming anyone yet, or are we so far so good? Hopefully having a good time. Yay. All right, super. Thank you guys for the feedback. I appreciate it. All right, let me get back into our clip. and we will start talking specifically about some of these vegetables. Now, I've chosen a bunch of the most commonly grown species here in our region, but there are obviously more vegetables than there is time in this particular webinar. So I've also included at the end, I'm going to drop in the chat, a really awesome PDF with 2 different types of graphs for companion planting. So don't feel like you need to write all of this down. Don't feel like you need to absorb this. Don't feel like you need to memorize this. Okay, guys, it's not meant to be overwhelming. It's just meant to provide a little bit of information to spark your brain juices and allow you to start considering how you're going to create the garden of your dreams. And if it's not this year, maybe it's next year. And if you do some of it this year, that's fantastic. Congratulate yourself for taking the first step in really making a difference in your garden. None of this has to be done overnight. It's not supposed to be exhausting, even though it sometimes feels that way. Alrighty, so first and foremost, there is nothing more delicious than a freshly picked cherry tomato. Don't even try arguing with me because there's not. You will lose that argument. A cherry tomato, jewels. And there are lots of things we can do to improve our tomatoes' growth. The big thing is soaking that sucker down with water. Before we even soak it down, we are stripping those lower leaves and submerging that baby into the ground, because all those little hairs growing off of the stem, off of the actual, like the large stem, are baby roots. So get that sucker deep into the ground because you will reap the benefits of it later. And then soak the crap out of it and make sure that you are soaking it deep down into the roots. There are lots of different plants that we can plant near tomatoes to encourage juicier, fruitier, more delightful fruits at the end of the season and throughout the season. One of the big ones that comes to mind for me is borage. Borage is a beautiful little herb that has indigo colored star-shaped flower that honeybees in particular, as well as bumblebees, are attracted to the way children are attracted to water slides. They come out of nowhere to get to borage. And borage has been said to improve the flavor of tomatoes when it's planted around it. Borage is edible also, so it's one of those combination scenarios where you can companion plant it to benefit the tomatoes and also consume it. So it's a win-win. It's beautiful. It tastes kind of like spinach, but the texture's a little funky. It's kind of like mullein. It's a little fuzzy, we'll say. But it brings pollinators into the garden all year long because it continuously blooms and it improves the flavor of the tomatoes. Now, I think I remember saying to you guys already that none of this is quote unquote scientifically proven, but it's been proven in that many gardeners have chosen to plant their species and record what they're doing year after year. And when there are benefits and successes, they write it down and then they tell other gardeners, and that is how we end up with these references. They are from words of mouth, they are from garden journals, and while they are not scientifically proven, they seem to work. And so it's kind of like working with nature. You're never entirely sure what you're going to get, but these particular companion plants, asparagus and garlic and basil and cilantro and lettuce and horehound and borage and carrots, being planted near tomatoes, have resulted in really fabulous crops from many different gardeners, enough so that there are able to be books written about them, which I will recommend when we're finished. So asparagus, I get a lot of questions with that one all the time of people saying, well, my asparagus is freaking huge. How am I supposed to plant my tomatoes near my asparagus to have them, benefit one another? And the idea is you got to let your asparagus grow, right? After you cut it those first couple of times in the early spring, you do have to let it grow. But the idea is that if you plant with enough distance between the beds so that they're close enough together without being overshadowed by one another, tomatoes can be much more, bountiful. They can be much more bountiful. You get more fruits off of them when they're planted near asparagus. But that means you have to have an asparagus bed, and having an asparagus bed is a huge commitment because those suckers can live up to 25 years. So if you're in a rental scenario, you don't have asparagus, don't worry about it. If you do have asparagus, consider planting your tomatoes alongside of that particular bed. Most asparagus beds are long and lean, and tomatoes, as we know, grow tall rather than wide. And so a row of tomatoes in front of a row of asparagus is a really great way to utilize space and also benefit your plants. The asparagus is going to go to flower, which also will bring in your pollinators. And since we need pollinators for our tomatoes, life cycle continues. Garlic is a much easier one, but garlic too, I get the same question of, wait a second, I plant my garlic in the fall. I say, yes, you do. So by the time those green sprouts start coming up, you know where you can plant your tomatoes. They've already given you an easy design. Plant your tomatoes around them and then cut your scapes and cook them with your tomatoes because they should be ripening around the same time.
Hey, Willa?
Yeah.
Really quick, we have a question. Someone has
Oh,
their hand up. Emily.
Shoot, Emily.
Hey, my question is that for asparagus and tomatoes, one of the things I've always heard about tomatoes is you plant them in different places every year to avoid some of the fungal issues and disease issues. So can you address that? Because asparagus, you clearly are not planting in different places every year.
No, and you beat me to my last one. So I always say at the end of this, when I have it like in my little notes down here, is to mention crop rotation because this is where things get a little bit tricky. I'm gonna come back to that question, okay, Emily? It's right after we finish talking about carrots. So I'll come back to that in a second.
Yep.
Basil being one of our annuals, just like our cilantros and our lettuces, those guys you can plant while you're planting your tomatoes, and they grow really well all around them. When I plant my tomato plants, it is literally a zigzag pattern, and it's tomato, 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 and anywhere there's a little hole in that zigzag, like a reverse, almost like you're doing a lattice shaped garden, is basil. And they grow phenomenal together, especially if you remember to continuously snip the lower branches of the tomatoes, which reduces splashback from rain and overhead watering and reduces pathogens like powdery mildew. It also gives great airspace for that basil to fill in and bush out, and the flavors together, again, you can't go wrong. They grow well together. They improve one another's flavor. It's like having that delicious salad whose name I'm going to forget, where you do the mozzarella and the tomato and the basil, and there's a fancy word for it, but it's amazing, melt in your mouth goodness. Those things growing together benefit one another flavor-wise, and basil is a natural insecticide. And I say insecticide, it's not a chemical that it's doing, it's a smell. Basil, as we know, is very pungent. It's an aromatic herb. And there's a lot of different bugs that really dislike the smell of basil. Flea beetles being one of them. And flea beetles can be a real, better word that's not a profanity, they can be a real pain in the garden. And so planting your aromatic herbs around the plants that are usually more susceptible to annoying pests like tomatoes can be a really easy way to deter them and also reap the benefits of added herbs for your dinner table. Some other ones down here that are just quickly to mention, cilantro grows really well along with it and doesn't take up a lot of space, but it covers up soil because it bushes. So now you're saving water. That's a natural mulch that is an edible mulch. And when I'm talking about these edible mulches, my friends, I'm not talking about them the way I talk about bark mulch or straw. It's an edible mulch in that you're growing it to eat it, but it's giving you the added benefit of shading the soil and reducing water evaporation as well as natural weed suppression. So cilantro and lettuce are really great natural quote unquote mulches. Horehound is another one of our medicinal herbs, great for coughing. It makes a really amazing lozenge in our fall season, and it grows very similar to borage. It's another one of those fuzzy plants. And it too has been said to improve the flavor of tomatoes. Now this last one down here, carrots, one of our root vegetables. All these other ones we've been talking about except for our garlic, talking about harvesting the aerial parts and the aerial fruits. Carrots grow below the ground, as all of you know. Carrots are said to improve the flavor of tomatoes, and tomatoes improve the flavor of carrots, but tomatoes hinder the growth of carrots. So the idea behind this is if you want really flavorful, funky looking carrots, plant them near tomatoes because the flavor is better, but the growth is funky. And I know that sounds crazy. I've tried it and I agree. They always grow a little stumpier, a little sideways, sometimes pronged, but they taste so much better than the carrots I grow in my carrot bed. Maybe it's because I suck at growing carrots, but I think it's because there's something cool going on with those tomatoes. So when we're talking about companion planting and we're mix and matching perennials and annuals, as is the case with asparagus, and I'm going to call garlic a perennial for this particular slide just because the garlic's already in the ground before putting in the tomato. We're getting to that conflict of crop rotation, because we've been told all the time we shouldn't grow our brassicas in the same place we did last year, and we shouldn't grow our tomatoes in the same place we did last year. But if we have perennials, that's where they're going to be every year. And that's true, unless you want to start rotating and transplanting your perennials, which I wouldn't advise because no one's got time for that nonsense. The idea here is that, yes, crop rotation can be very beneficial to plants if there is a problem. Crop rotation is great for diverting an issue. If there's no issue and there's no pest and there's no fungal infection or bacterial wilt in your soil, you don't need to rotate. You need to amend. We always need to amend our soil because the idea is whatever you're putting anywhere is going to take up nutrients and they're not going to give it back. It's a one-way road. They're taking the nutrients out of the soil, and that's that. You're effectively consuming those nutrients when you eat the vegetables, fruits, but they're not giving it back to the soil. Even the peas, to some degree, are not giving it back to the soil. They're using it to produce their fruits that you then eat, so you're getting the nutrients. So crop rotation is awesome in that if you have an issue in garden A, you can shift it to garden B the next year, and the issue stays in garden A, and you can plant a different species that isn't as susceptible to that issue that's occurring in garden A. But if you don't have a problem in garden A, and garden A is next to the asparagus bed, and your tomatoes kicked ass last year because they grew next to the asparagus bed, it's okay to plant your tomatoes there again. Crop rotation works because your soil gets depleted, and when our soil gets depleted, that's when we get issues like pest invasions or bacterial issues. Last year was really, really bad for verticillium, I think is how you say it, wilt. And it's one of those scenarios that occur when soil is stressed. It was stressed because of the drought. Crop rotation, I'm not putting it down because I do it frequently myself. I think it works great, specifically because I'm a lazy gardener and I like my root vegetables to break up the soil for me, and then I can plant softer stuff the next year. But I'm not rotating it because there's an issue. I'm trying to prevent the issue by companion planting. And Emily, if that doesn't clarify it enough, we can talk a little bit after. I just want to keep moving with the slides. So this next one, another one of our common garden friends, is our nightshade families, like our delicious eggplants. This is an image of the Rosa Bianca blend, which is my absolute favorite. It's creamy. It's not as acidic as our big purple beasts. And it grows really well with tomatoes because they're in the same family. Remember we had said earlier, like sometimes growing things in the same family, they argue with each other. In the case of the nightshades, they get along really well together because they need the same growing conditions. Eggplants, tomatoes, they love heat. They love hot, 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 hot sun as long as their roots remain fairly cool. And so it makes sense that an eggplant would get along quite well with tomatoes as well as peppers. And of course with basil, because we already know that basil grows really well with tomatoes. Tarragon is another herb that grows really well alongside eggplants because it helps to repel insects while enhancing flavor. Again, not scientifically proven, and everyone's palate is different. But gardeners who grow tarragon next to their eggplant have reported finding that the eggplant's flavor is richer and more robust than when they plant it by itself. So it's one of those improvements. And if you like tarragon, there you go. It's a win-win for the kitchen too. I have had great luck growing my eggplant with Holy Basil. I'm not gonna remember the Latin of that one. Liz, you might. What is it? Ossimum. We'll come back to that one. It'll come to one.
I know Ossimum. I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember that one either. Sanctum sounds right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Holy Basil is not a cooking herb. It is a tea herb. It's the one that they are growing over in India. They put them next to the temples. It grows really big and bushy. It smells like heaven. I'm pretty confident Holy Basil is what heaven smells like. And because it gets really bushy, it makes for an awesome little water evaporation deterrent. So it grows really well and it throws a ton of flowers. It's one of those plants that if you struggle with trying to keep things from bolting, it will drive you insane because it bolts so quickly, but it grows phenomenal with the nightshades and it shades the ground so that you don't have to deal with so much of that water evaporation. It also is a natural antimicrobial. So if we have a rainy season someday again, and you choose to do the Holy Basil, it's going to catch the rain, and the rain hitting the ground and then potentially splashing onto your nightshades aren't going to be as susceptible for carrying different funguses, which is kind of cool. So any basil that you're choosing to put in your garden, consider incorporating it as an annual with the rest of your annuals. Think of your lemon basil, your Thai basil. Different types of basils all come from the same family, and they all have very aromatic leaves that are natural insect deterrents. So planting them near your nightshades that are more susceptible for getting nibbled on by different types of creatures is a great way to benefit the plant and benefit you. Eggplants also grow really well around beans. So beans, bush beans specifically, you don't want to do your pole beans because then they're going to kind of choke out that entire region. And potatoes grow well around eggplants, but not so much around tomatoes. So as you're kind of putting these things together, you're creating relationships in your mind. And remember, there's a chart. You don't have to remember all of this, but it helps us to start figuring out how to set up our vegetables and our gardens for the best yields without too much work. So peppers, again, in our nightshade family. So we're thinking basils and cilantros and garlics. Parsley is one of those awesome herbs that if you have space in the garden, throw some parsley in it, because parsley is one of those delightful, bushy biennials. Technically, you can bring it inside and it comes back. It is a delicious plant that also feeds nature. One of the biggest creatures that you are going to find in your garden when you plant parsley is something that you might initially think of as a pest, but it turns into a swallowtail butterfly, because the swallowtail butterfly larva acts as a host to, or I'm sorry, the parsley acts as a host to the swallowtail butterfly. More butterflies in the garden, more pollination occurring, a more symbiotic relationship occurring right there in your micro ecosystem. Okra is another really nice one to grow around peppers. Peppers can be spindly. We need to tip them early in the season. Otherwise they get really branchy, really limby, and kind of pathetic looking. And then those big, huge fruits knock them down. Okra works as a really nice natural wind buff if you put them around your peppers. And it's one of those excellent edible scenarios where it works as a buffer and you can eat it. Marjoram, another one of our herbs that is designed to go well with a lot of things for cooking, but is encouraged, or it is said to improve the growth as well as the flavor of the peppers. And oregano, if left to go to flower, invites some really awesome predatory insects that will come and assist you with pest control. Oregano should be in everyone's garden, even if you don't eat it, because it's beautiful, it's very easy to cater to. It comes back every single year as a very hardy perennial, and the flowers are stunning and appeal to a variety of insects that are both lovely to look at as well as vicious killers to soft bodies insects like aphids and caterpillars. Cucumbers. Everybody likes cucumbers, and fortunately most people like pickles too, which is great because one of the best companion plants for cucumbers is dill. Dill is an awesome one to grow right alongside of your cucumbers. If you're not growing your cucumbers vertically, growing companion plants with cucumbers gets really challenging because they sprawl and they fall and they take up a lot of space. When they're on the ground, they're also really susceptible to different types of wilts that come up from the soil, especially in times of drought or stress. If you are going vertical, it's going to give you more space to grow different varieties of plants, and you can plug all that extra space with dill and make tons of pickles. Chives is another one of our perennials, right? Makes it a little bit trickier, but if you're not having issues with crop rotation, or if you're comfortable repeatedly planting in similar places, having crops in between your cucumbers of chives looks really cool. You got your spikes with the really pretty broad leaves of the cucumber. They taste really great together, and the chives really do seem to repel aphids. Chives are very pungent, right? They're in the allium family, like the garlics and the onions. And it works really, really nicely to keep them, the aphids, I mean, at bay from the lovely cucumbers that they enjoy snacking on. Nasturtiums, as I mentioned before, I like to use as a trap crop. So I will sometimes plant them on the other side of the trellis, and in hopes that they will eat the nasturtiums rather than the cucumbers. And it seems to work effectively. It's not that they will not touch the cucumbers, but they definitely go for the nasturtiums first, allowing me to get to them because I can anticipate where I'm going to find them rather than having to be out there trying to hunt them down on the green undersides of the cucumbers. Radish is another one that seems to help deter different types of species of bugs. The cucumber beetle in particular. That's that little striped bastard that shows up really early in the season. He's orange with the little black stripes. He's actually really cute. He hums when you catch him, which is not cute. It's really gross. If you catch him, he does this buzzing sound and it's like a hum. It's horrible. And if you squish them, they're yellow and they stink. You guys know what I'm talking about? I bet you do. So those little buggers come out fairly soon, but radishes seem to deter them. And I don't know why, because radishes grow underground and their greens are really squat, but they grow early, right? That's one of our cool crops, so we can put them in soon. So if you have your bed designed where you've got your chives and you know you're going to be planting your cucumbers in between them, you can do little rings of radishes. And the concept is that because those stupid little striped devils don't like radishes, they're not going to come to the cucumber plant when it's more susceptible, when it's a young baby, when it's a little seedling. Those guys are the ones that if they get munched on, they're done, right? But once your plant is established, the cucumber beetles are obnoxious, but they're not going to take out your plant the way they would if it was a seedling. So planting a little buffer zone of radishes seems to work pretty well at establishing them. It works really well if you're starting your cucumbers in mounds from seeds. It doesn't work as well if you buy an already established cucumber plant, because I truthfully think it has something to do with the bug walking on the soil, hitting the radishes and being like, oh, gross, see ya, and walking away. It's kind of like a fence situation. Whereas if the cucumber vine is already big and sprawling, the cucumber beetle shows up and is like, sweet, smorgasbord, we're already here. I hope that makes sense to you guys. Radishes grow everywhere in my garden where I have space. If there's a little hole, I throw in a radish because they're quick to germinate, so I know what's happening. I know it's not a weed because they're very easy to identify, those first two little cotyledons. And they don't take a long time to grow, so it's quick to reap the benefits. They're also blocking out the potential for weeds, exactly. And they seem to prevent a lot of different types of insects that I don't want in the garden. African marigolds are those big, beefy ones. They have like crackerjack species that can get super tall. They can work really nice for creating natural nematode resistance in your soil over the years. The catch is with marigolds, you got to use them repetitively. It's not like you put them into the soil and woohoo, no more nematodes. It's not how it works. The chemical that they are releasing needs to stay in your soil for a year. So technically, if you plant marigolds this year, next year you won't have as many issues with nematodes if you have nematode issues. It's kind of a commitment scenario. They also, those big, huge ones, can create a really nice shade buffer because sometimes our cucumbers get kind of sad in the hot of the sun. I have a friend that uses patio umbrellas for his cucumbers, and he sets them up in the heat of July, and it looks exactly as you would imagine it, the big, huge patio umbrellas in the middle of the garden, but it works. So that's great, but you can also create different types of natural sunshades, whether it's with African marigolds. Those are the ones that can get super, super big, like those, the 3 and 4 and 6 footers that look beautiful. There's awesome color. You can use them for cut flowers. And they also, if you're putting them in an Eastern or Southern orientation, can prevent some of that really hot sun coming in for later in the day and cool off your friends, the cucumbers. Broccoli, peas, and corn grow really well with them too, but as you can imagine, the peas grow early and then they're cut down, leaving the roots down below with those lovely little nitrogen fixing nodules down below. And then the corn would be a much later crop. Corn and broccoli, I mean, corn and cucumber seems like it might be a cool idea to grow them together. I have never had any luck, but I'd be interested in hearing about that from you guys later on. I'm going to keep moving, but if anyone has ever experienced a corn cucumber combo, was a lot of alliteration, I'd love to hear if you have success stories, because I haven't. They always die. The cucumbers always just like wilt and crap out. But maybe you guys have had better luck. My computer is frozen. Come on. There we go. Okay, so we've got the same thing going for your lettuce. That's why my computer was being stupid. So cucumbers and lettuce grow very similarly. And when you think about it, they don't, but they have very similar companion plants. So when you're thinking about all of the plant allies that cucumbers have, you can also swap that and exchange that for lettuce. Just, it's the similar growth and it gets along very well with the same types of plants. Moving on, strawberries, one of my most challenging crops to grow, not because they're difficult plants, but because chipmunks know exactly when they're ripe and steal them before I even get a chance to nibble on them. Borage is a really great one. We had mentioned that one before, that pretty blue shaped star flower. Borage helps deter the hornworms and the cabbage loopers. It helps to improve the flavor. The flavor of borage and strawberries actually goes really well together because it's kind of like a spinach strawberry salad. Garlic and chives can help really well with that. It's just a flavor thing. It's one of those weird scenarios where most of the time our companion plants, the flavor palette that we have as humans, goes really hand in hand with them, like basils and tomatoes, and basil and basil, oregano, and peppers. Garlic, chives, and strawberries is a new one. Doesn't go really well in your mouth, but it works really well in beds. And since strawberries and garlic and chives we can use as perennials, the garlic one's always kind of funky, right? The overwinterer, it's not technically a perennial, but the chives and the strawberries definitely are, and they grow really, really well together. And chipmunks and voles don't like chives. They really don't like garlic either. They're not going to touch them. So if you can surround your strawberries with garlic and chives, you're not only going to deter those rodents, but there's a chance that you're going to deter ants and aphids and many different types of insects as well. You can even make a tea out of your chives and your onions and your garlics by mashing them up, putting them in water, letting them steep in the sun, letting them cool so you don't scald your plants, and then spraying it on the leaves. Rabbits don't like the flavor of that. So if you're having rabbits or groundhog issues, spraying the lower limbs with that. And all of those insects we'd mentioned before that we don't want, don't like that flavor either. So you can benefit the plants by giving them a little water boost and also a natural organic treatment to keep those nasties at bay. Mint is another one. So mint is one of those kind of crazy, right? Mint gets a little aggressive. Be aware where you're planting it. But if it's in a perennial bed with your strawberries and you can monitor it, it grows really well when grown together with strawberries as well, and vice versa. The strawberries grow really well, and they do taste really nice together. Just gonna keep moving through. Remember, guys, we do have you guys have a sheet for this, so you don't have to remember all of this one. Another one of the plants that grows well with chives. Carrots and chives grow really well together, and chives improve the flavor of carrots. And that's definitely an issue we have in the Northeast, is flavorless or really gross carrots. Putting them next to tomatoes makes them a little funky shaped, but they do taste better. Putting them next to chives, they look good and they taste good. So it's a win-win. So consider having a chive and carrot bed set up. Consider growing them along with your onions. Onions grow underground as well, but their root systems aren't growing nearly as deep as carrots. So they're not going to compete with nutrients. They're actually going to benefit one another. Sage can help repel the carrot fly, which is good. And parsley can act as a decoy to pests when flowering. So they'll head over to the parsley rather than to your carrots. We don't seem to have too many carrot fly issues here in the Northeast. I'm speaking from my own personal experiences. You guys can share that afterwards too. Again, with the carrots, radishes help loosen the soil. So if you are doing carrots that are worked into the soil when it's a little bit cooler, radishes can kind of pave the way. So you can do a row of radish, harvest those suckers and eat them, and then drop your carrots right into that exact line that it was before. And with that successional planting, you can be getting multiple crops all through the early summer. They don't do so hot in the heat. The only thing carrots are known for really not getting along with is dill. Dill and carrots, for whatever reason, seem to have a little background history that we don't have an excuse for, and they don't get along very well. So keep those two apart. Plant the dill with the cucumbers and all will be good in the hood. What are we looking at? Beans, right? So beans, we've got some beets. Beets and beans grow really well together, and beets you can set up super early so you can establish where you're planning on putting your beans by planting your beets first. They improve the flavor of both, which makes sense, mostly because radishes are loosening up the soil and bringing nutrients up, and beans are helping out with different types of nitrogens. Beans and potatoes grow excellent when grown together. If you guys are doing potatoes, consider horseradish on the edge. And I know horseradish can get a little crazy. Horseradish improves the flavor of potatoes. So growing them together is great for your potato harvest. And then putting some beans around the edges, bush beans, Yes, bush beans and pole beans go really well together. You could do side by side or doing rows together, making sure that there's room for mounding, right, for your potatoes. That's one of those things you just got to keep in mind because the potatoes are going to require a lot of dirt being tossed on them as they grow, whereas your beans are pretty happy with just the amount they've got in between. I'm running out of time, so I'm talking quickly. We've got just a couple more slides that I wanted to show really quick before we are out. A lot of us are going zucchini. Zucchini is great. It's delicious, it grows, it makes you feel like, you know, you've got the biggest green thumb in the world because no one can't grow zucchinis. They're fabulous, right? We have like a national leave a zucchini on your neighbor's step day in July. I think that's a New Hampshire thing. They are very, very susceptible to squash bugs. Squash bugs are a pain in the butt. Nothing a nice vacuum won't help out with in the garden, but they stink. Something that seems to work, but does not prevent, but it does seem to make a slight difference is those radishes. And so when you are first planting your squash, and if you like radishes, if you don't like radishes, find a neighbor that does, because this does seem to work. Planting them in circles around your squash. I plant mine in spirals. It looks like a drunk caterpillar went through my garden and dropped seeds of radish everywhere. The radishes are going to grow faster than the squash. So by the time the squash is getting big enough that it's not going to allow any sun to hit the radishes, I'm pulling the radishes. And the hope, because I haven't been entirely successful with this, but the hope is that with the radishes being there early on, the squash bugs might not show up. They always do, but they don't seem to be as big of an infestation as they have in the past when I've just done like big, huge blocks of squash by itself. So radishes being over there seems to work. Mint is another one. And I don't grow mint with my zucchini. I grow mint, I cut my mint, and I throw it all over the ground around my zucchini plants and my summer squashes. And that seems to make a huge difference too. You can also make a peppermint spray just like you would with your garlic or your onions, a diluted bottled water with that stuff in there. It smells amazing, right? Mint smells fantastic. And it does seem to keep those stupid, soft, nasty little creatures away. Mint grows heartily. So if you have a mint patch, maybe with your strawberries, harvest it, dry it, or harvest it and just toss it around your zucchini, and it seems to make a difference. You can totally try growing it together, but mint is really aggressive and it takes up a lot of space and your zucchini will get strangled. Corn, Three Sisters, it works the best, right? You can also throw in some sunflowers and marigold for colors. They pollinate themselves with the wind with their little, tassely thingies. So you're not looking for bugs here. The marigolds can help deter the Japanese beetles that sometimes get them. You can plant your yellow rose and totally sacrifice that sucker, but then you'll save your crops from the corn and the different beetles that get them. And amaranth is another one that you can grow with corn because it loosens up the soil. And then it's an awesome composter. So you can turn it right into the soil afterwards to benefit because they are wicked nutrient hogs. Corn requires a lot of compost. Planting dill around them brings in those beneficial insects that are going to be eating the nasties that are trying to eat your corn before you do. Horseradish, I think I had mentioned already with potatoes. They work really well together. And all of the other stuff on here, your marigolds and parsleys and thymes, catmint, kind of tricky because it gets a little aggressive growing too, but all of these plants you can plant within different parameters of one another, keeping them close because as companions, they will benefit one another. I'm totally skimming through this stuff because I will get to it momentarily, but quick takeaways, fennel, whether it's bronze or otherwise, does not play well with other plants. It hinders the growth of a lot of other plants. It makes them taste funky. Fennel always benefits. It's almost like it leaches nutrients from other locations and it doesn't play well. It's kind of bossy boots and doesn't get along great with a lot of other plants. So if you're planting fennel because it's amazing and delicious, plant it in its own little section of the garden. You can plant it near mint because they can feud and beat each other up, but neither of them will ever die. But for the most part, don't put them near your other vegetables because your other vegetables will be sensitive to fennel's narcissistic tendencies. Parsley, on the other hand, is an absolute gem, and you can plant it anywhere in the garden. Whenever I have a gap in my garden, I will divide my parsley and plant more of it, or I'll tuck in some calendula or marigold, adding color and bounty to an otherwise oftentimes just green vista. And when there is a green vista, I know with my human eyes, the insects are recognizing it too. So I try to divert that by changing to different colors and adding all different things like marigolds and calendula and dahlias, because dahlias are pretty too, and they don't seem to have any issues with any of our other plant species. So I'm going to pause and stop because per usual, I'm out of time because I could talk about this with you guys for 9 hours and there's never enough time to do this. So I just threw a lot of information at you guys. I'm going to share that PDF before I forget, and I would love to talk about whatever you need clarification on or questions or stories of things that work for you. How do I do this? Okay. So Liz, if you don't mind, I'm going to try and get those PDFs in there if you want to facilitate any questions from the conversation or anyone that's raising hands right now. I'm going to try and get these in here.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Laura, do you have a question?
I do. Terrific presentation. Thank you, Willa.
Oh, you're welcome.
One of my favorite companion plants is the nasturtium, and I love it. I love it in salad for the leaves and the flowers, and we eat them almost every day throughout the year because we've got a greenhouse. And so, and we've never had real issues with aphids in the nasturtiums. And so I'm just wondering, I mean, like, not what am I doing wrong, but
No,
how, like, is that going to, am I jinxing it now?
No,
because
I mean,
I'm laying out the garden today. I was going to start planting tomorrow, and now I'm really panicked about, like, am I just going to create a disaster with all these nasturtiums? Because I do like whole layers of nasturtiums.
That's amazing. Laura, first of all, it sounds absolutely beautiful and I'm wicked envious. And secondly, I think it's the same concept of that crop rotation thing. If you don't have issues with aphids, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like, it sounds like you've got a winning situation right there. For my location, I have aphids. I don't know if we have like an aphid invasion in Chester, or I don't know. I don't know what the situation is, but every year I get aphids, and I know that they love nasturtiums. So now I plant, like in that little picture, I don't know if you saw, I keep my nasturtiums on the patio. I keep them on the patio, and within days of them blooming, they're covered with aphids. So if you don't have them, my guess is they haven't found you, and that's great. And that's wonderful. So keep doing what you're doing.
I do rotate. I rotate the crops every year, and in the greenhouse we do get aphids, but they usually, their timing is usually consistent with when the Asian lady beetles start coming into the house. And so they go into a portal of an Altoid tin. We collect them in the house, and we take them to the greenhouse, and we feed the aphids to them, and so they sort of take care of each other.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. Thank you.
That is integrated pest management at its finest, Laura. Well done.
Yes.
No, if you don't have any issues with nasturtiums, I would absolutely continue doing what you're doing. And if it becomes a problem, then you treat the problem. We try to do this preventative stuff, right? Preventative rather than reactive responses to things works great. But at the end of the day, when we're working with nature, there is very little predictability out there. So if things are working for you guys and you're not harming nature and she's not harming you and everyone's symbiotic and happy, go with it. Go with it. What kind of nasturtiums are you growing, if you don't mind me asking? What species?
I've got there's 3 different kinds. One, I don't remember the names.
Okay, no worries.
There's one that's bright yellow, there's one that's orange with red, there's one that's red, and then there's one that's a deep orange.
Awesome.
And so I have them all interconnected, and it's just really beautiful. And
it sounds gorgeous.
So, and tell me, do you do snapdragons at all? Because I find that that's fun in salads too.
Yeah, they are fun. I grow snapdragons at the nursery where I work, but I personally haven't grown them. I grow them and put them in my flower beds, but my flower beds are not, it's like like a window box. And so it's not integrated with the gardens, but you could totally do snapdragons and cosmos and zinnias. There's tons of different ornamentals that can be integrated into your edible garden. The only thing I always
Yep.
tell people when we're talking about edible landscaping is try not to put poisonous plants along your
Yes.
edibles. The first one that comes to mind is foxglove. Don't put foxglove in your edible garden. Foxgloves, they're absolutely beautiful, but they do not need to get accidentally mistaken for something that can be consumed. So plant with conscious, right? Like go into what you're doing with a little bit of background history. And there are so many amazing books that we can check out for learning about a variety of different ways. Are you guys reading this the right way? Because it's backwards on my screen. I'm going to email you, Liz, by the way. I can't get the PDFs to go into the box, so I'll email and you can email everyone that's been here tonight because I have those PDFs I want you guys to have access to.
Yeah, that sounds great. We'll include all of that in the follow-up
Perfect. I'll give you
email
guys
with-
a book list of my recommendations as well as those 2 PDFs that I've been using to help me plan them because it's grid locking stuff. Like that's not the way my brain works. I'm a lot of experimental and visual. And so doing like Excel sheets where it's like, okay, carrots don't get along with this. And then you meet here, it works for a lot of us. So I'm going to include that one for some of you guys that are more Excel sheet reader, and then some just general like cohesive elements that work really well for you. Anyone else have any questions? I feel like I am all over the place right now. Was this
That was
helpful
amazing,
or
Willa.
overwhelming? Helpful. I'm super
Yeah,
glad.
very.
I'm thrilled to hear that. This is one of those topics that's very near and dear to my heart, and we could totally do a workshop on it, which I do when we're not dealing with global pandemics, because it's very, very fun to be able to walk through and experience it. There's one thing when you're hearing it, and that's why I encourage you guys, if you have extra questions that come up later, Liz has my information. I'm the magpiesapprentice.org. Like, I love talking about gardens. You can come at me with questions. You can send photographs. I can send photographs of my gardens. It's sharing is caring in the garden world. We are all benefiting from being out in nature and out in our gardens. The health benefits, I can't even go on and on about it because it's just so good for all of us. So share what you know, share what works for you, but also share what hasn't worked for you, because then some of us who haven't attempted it won't attempt it. You'll be saving us some pain and suffering, and we can all be reaping the benefits of eating healthier and creating a more healthy, collaborative community environment. I would just want to, is the chat box good? Deer problem. Oh, deer problem. Jennifer. Where are you living, Jennifer? Is she still here? Did she peace out? Jennifer, you're still here. What are they eating? Everything?
Everything.
Everything. Are you able to put in a fence? I know fences are wicked costly and they are not beautiful, but electric fencing is one of the best preventatives for deer.
Yeah, I can do that.
Oh, right on. Wellscroft fencing, Wellscroft. I'll type that one in. Here, I'm sitting here. I'm going to spell it to you.
That's what I have.
You do? You have electric and they're still getting in?
No, I haven't put it around the garden yet.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, holy Moses, those are some ingenious deer you've got over there.
It was around my chicken house. Now I have to move it.
Oh, yeah. There's really cool ways of setting them up for failure, those deer. And the biggest thing you're going to want to do, Jennifer, is bait them, because you want that deer to get it right on his nice, adorable, wet nose so that it's a one and done experience where he learns that is not where I want to be. Different fences with different spaces apart. So say your garden is over here and you put a fence here and another fence here with a specific amount of distance in between. I believe it's 5 feet. It creates a visual barrier that they can't figure out because they won't be able to jump the full length, but they won't be able to jump in between and over either. So it's creating visual effects. It's kind of like trying to prevent the aerial predators from getting your chickens with CDs that have the reflectors or swirlies. It disorients them, it throws them off their game, and so they're less apt to come in and eat your chickens or get into your garden. So I would go for the electric fence first and foremost, and seriously bait it. There's ways of like putting like a little soda bottle cap with some honey in it, and if they hit it with their nose, they get the good zap, and then it's a done situation. I wish you luck. Deer are challenging.
Yeah, they're very challenging.
First year of planting. What to start off versus waiting until fall or next year is a bit well. What to start off with? Who's asking that? Ashley, are you still here, Ashley? Oh, did she leave? Yes, you are. Okay. Ashley, start with things that you like. Always grow what you enjoy. If you are a sweet pea junkie, grow sweet peas. If you love broccoli, try out broccoli. If you don't love hot peppers, don't grow them. I have so many people who have an issue with a crop where like Brussels sprouts. Oh my gosh, I just have so much trouble with Brussels sprouts. And my first question is, do you really love Brussels sprouts? And they say, no. So why grow them? If they're giving you pain, get rid of them. Only grow what you want. So think of something that makes you happy, Ashley, and go for it. If it's tomatoes, go for tomatoes. Maybe plant some basil with it. If it's cucumbers, go for cucumbers and dill, because then not only will you have your cucumbers, but you're going to be making pickles at the end of the season too. Always start with the things you like. Start small, knowing that next year you can expand. You can expand vertically, horizontally, spirally, however your imagination can work. You can make those vegetables work for you. I hope that helps. You're very welcome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, energetic, it's a lot of coffee. I'm 95% caffeine. Easy crops that will boost your confidence. Yeah, greens, right? Are you thinking of greens and radishes, Liz? Yeah. Those are the ones that I always go to also. They're easy to grow, they're happy, and flowers are fun too. Support your local growers. Plant sales down here in our slightly southern region, all of our garden club plant sales are going to be happening June 5th. And me and the rest of my plant junkie friends all just do these rotational things where we split bulbs and we share bulbs. Everyone always ends up with starters, like seed starters, because the idea is we don't know if our seeds are going to germinate. Do we need 50 tomatoes? Nope, but we're going to plant 50 tomatoes to see if they germinate. So going to those plant sales right now is a really great, inexpensive way to get involved, support your local community, and not feel like you just lost all of your money if your 15 tomatoes completely crapped out because you didn't put in all the effort of buying them from a nursery. I work at a nursery, but I shop at plant sales because sometimes the nurseries are expensive and I don't want to mess up, especially if I'm a newbie. Swiss chard and spinach go very well together. I just planted that like this morning. I think I did my second succession of rainbow chard and spinach behind my leeks because they all seem to work really symbiotically together. Anybody else, my friends? Well, I want to thank you so much for having me join you this evening. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy lives to listen to me gush on about companion planting. Again, you've got my information. Technically, Liz has my information, but if you want to reach out, do reach out. There's nothing that makes me happier than talking about gardens and birds and wildlife. So if you are interested in any of those topics, please be in touch and live, love, laugh in the garden and grow where you are planted because you are going to sow the seeds for the future. It's believing in tomorrow. So thank you guys so much for being here. Be well, take care, stay safe.
Thank you again, Willa, and thanks everyone else for being here. And a follow-up email will be sent out with the recording link and all of the resources that Willa has mentioned. So thank you and happy gardening as we get into this, early summer, late spring time.
Awesome.
All
Be
right.
well, everyone. Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everyone.